This is a view of the Temple of Jupiter, or the Capitolium, in the Forum of Pompeii, an extremely important building, and one that you can see from the monument list also began to be put up quite early, in 150 BC. But its triple cella, honoring the Capitoline triad, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, was, it won't surprise you to hear, put up only after the Romans made Pompeii a colony. And that happened in 80 BC. So you'll see that I've given you a date of 150 for the temple, but 80 BC for the renovation of the cella to incorporate these three spaces for statues of the Capitoline triad. Let's look at the plan first. You see it down here at the bottom. Let me move that arrow away. You see it down here at the bottom, and you can see that the plan of the temple corresponds to plans that we've seen for other temples that we've studied thus far this term, the Temple of Portunus, for example, where we see this combination of an Etruscan plan and a Greek elevation. You can see here the facade emphasis, single staircase, deep porch, freestanding columns in that porch, the flat back wall, as was characteristic of Etruscan temple design, the plain side walls over here. We can see all of that in this plan. And we also know that the building was made out of stone, tufa, in this case tufa, not from Rome, but tufa from this part of Italy, from the Campanian region, tufa there for both the columns and also the capital. So a stone building. So this same combination of Etruscan plan and Greek elevation that we saw in Rome. This view of the temple also shows you that it had a tall podium, as was characteristic of these other early temples. Here you can see the remains of the stone columns and of the building itself. It's not as well preserved as we wish it were, but enough is there to give us a very good sense of what the Capitolium looked like in ancient Roman times. I mentioned that the other early structure added to the Forum complex was the Basilica of Pompeii, and I'd like to turn to that now. The Basilica of Pompeii dates to around 120 BC. You see its plan here again in the bottom left, and you'll remember it's splayed off from the Forum to the left bottom side as you face the Temple of Jupiter. You can see that the plan of the Basilica is very interesting because it actually is quite similar to the plan of the Forum itself. It is a rectangular space, not as large and not as elongated, but nonetheless a rectangular space. Its entranceway is over here from the Forum. You can see that there are columns inside, a colonnade, just as we saw in the Forum itself. And the building is organized, as is the Forum itself, axially, so that there is a focus, something at the end that serves as the focus, and then the axiality comes from that. We see the focus over here at the end. It's not another temple. It is a tribunal on which the judge would sit to try the law cases that came here. The main difference between the Basilica and the Forum itself is that the Basilica was roofed in antiquity. The roof is no longer there, as you saw in the Google Earth view, but it was roofed in antiquity, whereas, again, the Forum was open to the sky. The view that you see of the Basilica as it looks today is also very illuminating. We are looking toward the tribunal. You can see the tribunal is actually extremely well preserved. We get a very good sense of what it looked like in antiquity. It itself has a tall podium. We can imagine the magistrate holding court up here on the top of that tall podium between the Corinthian columns in this case. We're not absolutely sure, but we believe the second story, which has smaller columns, they diminish in size on the second story, also were Corinthian columns, because you can see at least one of them. One of them is restored at the top right, but that one is a Corinthian capital. So we believe Corinthian order on the lower story, Corinthian order on the second story as well, beginning to show this Roman penchant for the Corinthian order, which we've already discussed. And you can also see here some of the lower parts of the columns that would have been encircling the center of the structure and dividing the central space from two aisles, one on either side. It looks like they're made out of brick, but they're actually made out of a tile that looks like brick, Brick wasn't being used quite this early, but a tile resembling brick was used in Pompeii, and we can see that served as the core of the columns. They would have been stuccoed over, though, and looked more like white marble, indicating to us, again, this desire of the Romans to make things look, at least, or the Samnites at this point, and ultimately the Romans when they renovated this structure, to make it look as Greek as possible. Yeah?
Why are the columns chopped off?
Why are the columns chopped off? You mean almost all in the same same place? You know, these things were often pieced, and so sometimes that can happen. And it's actually one of the, you raise a very interesting issue, because one of the things that archaeologists are beginning to speculate only recently about, and you see this in some of the most recent literature, is, you know, here we say, and I said it today, that this city was preserved exactly as it was in 79. And yet when you look at what it looks like, it's actually in pretty ruinous state. So that could mean two things. One, that they didn't make all that much progress in that 17 years, that they worked very hard, but the damage had been so significant that they were not able to bring these things back, you know, as much as they had hoped to. But it also may be just the destruction. I mean, while the ash and lava covered the city and protected it, it obviously wrought some damage as well. So that some of these things, you know, obviously came down, and over time the material got, you know, washed away or taken away or whatever. But it is curious that they sort of broke in exactly the same place, but it's because of the construction technique and the way in which they were pieced together.
So they would have been like stacked on, like,
yeah, exactly. Let me show you another view of the right side wall of the basilica. You see these columns here, again, very regular. There's a young woman standing right here, so that gives you a sense of scale. She's about only up to this point of the column, so you can see how large in scale these were in ancient Roman times. But if you look at the two that are closest to the tribunal, you will see that they have Ionic capitals. So that gives us enough to go on to speculate that the first story of columns, and there were two stories on the walls, 2 stories of columns, the lower ones were Ionic, and you can see that they are attached or engaged into the walls. Those were Ionic, and then we believe that there was a second story, that we know there was a second story, but that the second story of columns would have been Corinthian capitals up there. This is a restored view of what the basilica would have looked like in 120 after it was built, 120 BC after it was built. And you can see here the tribunal. We're looking toward the tribunal. It's 2-storied, Corinthian order on both stories, tall podium. We see here in black the columns of the central space that divide the center from the 2 side aisles. And here you can see very well the way in which they created 2 stories, a bottom story and an upper story. You could walk on that upper story. And using the Ionic capitals in the first story and smaller Corinthian columns in the second story. And it's important for me to note, in terms of the development, the later development of basilican architecture, that this basilica in Pompeii of this early date did not have what's called a clear story. C-L-E-R-E-S-T-O-R-Y. C-L-E-R-E-S-T-O-R-Y, a clear story. What is a clear story? A clear story is a series of windows open to the outside that allow views out and light in. This building does not have a clear story, so it probably, in its heyday, in the Samnite period, was probably on the dark side. But we will see that the clear story is incorporated into later Roman basilican architecture.